From a distance, Venezuela still looks alive. Sunlight reflects off glass towers in Caracas, catching the edges of buildings that once symbolized modern ambition. Cafes advertise imported coffee. Shelves display foreign brands. Smartphones glow inside traffic jams that stretch for blocks. Engines idling, horns impatient but familiar. Billboards loom overhead, promising prosperity, stability, a revolution already completed. The language is confident, the colors are bright, the message is simple. This country is functioning. For an outside observer, the picture is convincing. Oil still flows, the capital still moves. People still dress well, gather late, laugh loudly. The surface tells a story of survival, even resilience. A middle-income nation weathering storms through determination and pride. But systems do not fail on the surface. They fail underneath. Listen closely and something begins to feel off. Shops are stocked, yet salaries feel imaginary, numbers that exist only long enough to disappear. Streets are crowded, but productivity is absent, as if motion itself has replaced output. People work longer hours, commute farther, hustle harder, yet nothing accumulates. Not savings, not security, not time. Time is the first thing that goes missing. Days are spent chasing errands that should take minutes. Lines replace schedules, shortages interrupt routines, planning shrinks from years to weeks, from weeks to tomorrow. Life becomes busy, but strangely static, like running on a treadmill that never changes speed yet slowly tilts downward. This is the contradiction at the heart of the postcard. Activity without accumulation, motion without progress, an economy that looks busy but feels hollow the moment you try to build anything inside it. The illusion persists because it is reinforced everywhere. Government statistics report employment. Wages are announced and adjusted. New programs are launched. Currency circulates. Transactions happen. The machinery appears intact, but the signals no longer mean what they once did. In a functioning system, prices communicate scarcity. Wages reflect productivity. Profits guide investment. Losses warn of waste. In this system, those signals are muted, overridden, or ignored. What remains is noise. Constant movement without direction. The most unsettling part is that nothing looks broken enough to trigger alarm. There is no single catastrophic image, no sudden collapse, just a slow disconnect between effort and outcome, between work and reward, between time spent and value created. People sense it intuitively. They talk about it quietly. They adapt. They find side incomes, shortcuts, exits. But adaptation itself becomes evidence of decay. When survival replaces planning, the system has already shifted. This illusion is not maintained by deception alone. It is sustained by structure. A design that rewards appearance over function, distribution over production, stability over feedback. The economy keeps moving because stopping would reveal how little is actually being built. From far away, Venezuela still looks alive. Up close, it feels paused. And pauses in economic systems are rarely temporary. This documentary is not about a single man. It is about a system that learned to survive without listening to reality. Under Nicolás Maduro, Venezuela did not suddenly lose its way. What happened was quieter and more dangerous. The country completed a dependency loop that had been forming for decades, a structure where oil income replaced economic feedback and political survival replaced correction. To understand the trap, you have to strip it down to incentives. Oil revenue enters the state directly, not through taxes paid by millions of productive citizens, but through exports controlled by a centralized apparatus. This matters. When a government depends on taxpayers, it must tolerate feedback. People complain, businesses react, revenues fall if the economy weakens, pain travels upward. When a government depends on oil, pain can be redirected. Oil revenue funds the state. The state expands. It hires, subsidizes, controls, and distributes. Over time, markets stop being arenas of discovery and become channels of compliance. Prices are no longer signals. They are decisions. Wages are no longer reflections of productivity. They are announcements. Once markets stop signaling reality, reality becomes politically inconvenient. Shortages do not indicate failure, they indicate sabotage. Inflation does not reflect excess money, it reflects greed. Capital flight is not a warning, it is betrayal. Every natural correction mechanism is reinterpreted as an attack. The system stops asking what is happening and starts asking who to blame. At this point, reality is no longer debated, it is managed. The loop tightens. Distribution replaces production because distribution is visible and immediate. Production is slow, uncertain, and requires tolerating loss. Politically, distribution wins every time. Subsidies buy loyalty faster than factories build capacity. But distribution without production drains the base. To maintain appearances, the state must print, borrow, or seize. Each option weakens future capacity while stabilizing the present. Each delay makes reversal harder. This is where the trap closes. If leaders admit scarcity, they admit failure. If they lift controls, prices spike and legitimacy erodes. If they cut subsidies, unrest follows. If they stop printing money, the state itself runs out of fuel. Every correction carries immediate pain, while every distortion postpones it. The system becomes fragile not because it is chaotic, but because it is rigid. It cannot bend without breaking political survival. Reform becomes indistinguishable from surrender. From the inside, this feels like governance. From the outside, it looks like mismanagement. In reality, it is neither. It is a closed loop, doing exactly what its incentives demand. Once a system learns that survival depends on silencing feedback, it will do so relentlessly. Not out of ideology, but out of necessity. That is the trap. For most of the 20th century, Venezuela's economy followed a recognizable pattern. Oil exports dominated foreign income, but they coexisted with a partially functional private sector. The state was large, sometimes heavy-handed, but prices still talked, wages still mattered, imports still reflected scarcity. When something became expensive, it meant it was rare. When businesses failed, it meant they misread demand. The system argued with itself, and that argument produced information. Then that conversation stopped. As oil revenue grew more central, it stopped being just an income stream and became the primary signal the system listened to. Dollars arrived, not because factories produced efficiently or services improved, but because barrels left the ground. The economy stopped asking how value was created and started asking how it was allocated. This is a subtle but decisive shift. When money flows from productivity, governments need citizens to work, invest, and innovate. When money flows from geology, governments need something else entirely: control over the flow and loyalty around its distribution. Oil income does not complain. It does not strike. It does not vote. It does not demand transparency. It simply arrives, assuming the wells keep pumping. Over time, this changes how power behaves. Feedback from markets becomes optional. Feedback from politics becomes essential. What replaced economic feedback was distribution. Subsidies replaced prices. Instead of allowing costs to reflect scarcity, the state fixed them to preserve calm. Controls replaced signals. Instead of letting shortages reveal misallocation, production targets and import quotas were imposed. Appearances replaced balance sheets. What mattered was not whether firms were solvent, but whether shelves looked full today. On paper, this looked like stability. Inflation was denied, exchange rates were frozen, essential goods were protected from speculation. The system seemed orderly, decisive, managed. In reality, it was disconnecting. When prices stop adjusting, they stop informing. When wages stop reflecting productivity, they stop motivating. When imports are divorced from export capacity, they stop being sustainable. Each intervention muted a signal, and with each muted signal, the system lost another sense. The economy did not collapse overnight because nothing visibly broke at first. Oil income masked the damage, imports filled gaps, printing filled budgets, controls delayed panic. For a time, it felt like mastery over chaos. But reality does not stop moving just because a system stops listening. Costs kept rising underneath fixed prices. Incentives shifted from producing to accessing favors. Businesses learned that survival depended less on efficiency and more on compliance. Investment slowed, then fled. Maintenance was postponed. Capacity eroded quietly. This is how disconnection works, not as a crash, but as drift. The system keeps operating, but its outputs no longer correspond to inputs. Effort and reward separate, risk and consequence detach. From the outside, Venezuela still looked functional. From the inside, the rules had changed. Success no longer meant creating value, it meant navigating distribution. And once an economy makes that shift, returning to feedback becomes not just difficult, but destabilizing. Because reconnecting to reality means admitting how long it has been ignored. The system did not fail. It unplugged itself. For ordinary people, the math became cruelly simple. Income rose on paper. Costs rose in reality. Time became the missing variable. At first, the change was subtle. Salaries were adjusted by decree, announced with confidence, framed as protection. Numbers increased, official statements reassured, but prices did not respond to speeches. They responded to scarcity, logistics, and currency dilution. The gap between the two widened quietly. A teacher could receive a raise every few months and still feel poorer each week. The paycheck arrived, but its meaning evaporated almost immediately. Bread adjusted by physics, not policy. Transportation adjusted by fuel availability, not promises. Medicine adjusted by supply chains, not ideology. This is where inflation stops being an abstract percentage and becomes a behavioral force. When prices rise faster than wages, people cut luxuries. When prices rise faster than savings, people cut planning. When prices rise faster than time itself, people cut trust in the future. The horizon collapses, decisions shrink, life becomes tactical. Saving stopped making sense, not because people lacked discipline, but because delay became punishment. Money held for later lost value faster than effort could replace it. The rational response was to spend immediately, convert quickly, or exit entirely. Inflation did not just erode purchasing power, it rewired behavior. Time, once neutral, became hostile. A month of work no longer bought a month of stability. A year of effort no longer built a year of security. Planning became guesswork. Contracts became jokes. Long-term thinking turned into a liability. People adapted because people always adapt. They took second jobs. They traded favors. They waited in lines. They learned exchange rates the way sailors learn tides. They stopped measuring progress in savings and started measuring it in survival. But adaptation has a cost. When every decision is made under urgency, mistakes compound. When every paycheck is defensive, ambition shrinks. When the future feels unreliable, risk-taking becomes irrational. Entrepreneurship turns into arbitrage. Education turns into exit preparation. Work becomes a means to endure, not to build. The system quietly trained its population to stop believing in accumulation. This is the hidden violence of monetary instability. It does not arrive as chaos. It arrives as fatigue, as constant recalculation, as the feeling that effort leaks away somewhere between morning and night. And once that belief takes hold, productivity does not merely fall, it becomes irrelevant. Why improve output if the reward dissolves? Why invest in skill if returns are temporary? Why plan if tomorrow rewrites today? This is the line people remember, even if they never articulate it. When money decays faster than effort accumulates, work stops meaning anything. At that point, the economy is no longer just inefficient. It is psychologically inverted. People still work, still move, still struggle. But the internal logic that connects effort to outcome has snapped. What remains is motion without meaning. And no system can compound progress once its people learn that time itself is working against them. As the system hardened, institutions changed their function. Banks, once intermediaries between savers and investors, became conduits. Their role was no longer to assess risk or allocate capital efficiently, but to absorb directives. Credit decisions stopped being economic judgments and became extensions of policy. Lending followed permission, not probability. At the center sat the Central Bank of Venezuela, no longer acting as a stabilizer but as a mechanism. Its primary task shifted from preserving currency value to financing the state. When revenue fell short, money filled the gap. When confidence weakened, denial replaced adjustment. Printing became policy, not emergency. At the same time, the state expanded into every corner of economic life. It became the main employer, absorbing labor the private sector could no longer sustain. It became the main buyer, setting terms across supply chains. It became the main creditor, deciding who survived liquidity shortages and who did not. This concentration felt reassuring at first. Centralization looks like control. Control looks like stability. But risk does not disappear when it is centralized. It accumulates. By forcing banks to hold government paper, the system removed the illusion of safety from diversification. Every balance sheet began to depend on the same debtor. When that debtor weakened, everything weakened together. There was no shock absorber left, only a shared exposure pretending to be unity. Price controls compounded the problem. Companies were ordered to sell below cost to protect consumers. Losses were tolerated temporarily, then quietly socialized through credit, subsidies, or seizure. Fragility was not eliminated, it was hidden. Balance sheets stopped reflecting reality. Survival depended less on efficiency than on access. The irony is brutal. A system designed to protect the poor ended up making them hostages to monetary collapse. When currency lost value, there was no alternative wage base. When prices broke through controls, there was no buffer. When shortages spread, there was no competitive supply to compensate. The institutions meant to shield citizens instead amplified their exposure. This is the defining paradox of total dependence. When everything depends on the state cannot fail. A default is unthinkable. A budget cut is betrayal. A currency correction is sabotage. Every normal safeguard becomes politically radioactive. So the system does the only thing left. It prints. Printing delays consequences. It keeps salaries paid. It keeps shelves temporarily stocked. It keeps the machinery moving just enough to avoid immediate rupture. Each round buys time by borrowing from credibility. But credibility is not infinite. As money supply grows disconnected from output, inflation accelerates. As inflation accelerates, trust erodes. As trust erodes, velocity increases. People spend faster, convert faster, exit faster. The system must print more just to stand still. This is not chaos, it is logic. Printing feels like action. Stopping feels like collapse. So action continues, even as it undermines itself. The state cannot fail, so it prints. And by printing, it fails anyway, only slower and everywhere at once. Institutions still exist, buildings still stand, titles still circulate, but their original function is gone. What remains is an engine designed to move appearances forward while quietly consuming its own foundation. At this stage, stability is no longer real, it is rehearsed. And rehearsals cannot run forever without an audience noticing the cracks in the stage. By the time the damage is visible, every obvious fix is already wired with explosives. Cut subsidies and unrest follows immediately. Subsidies are no longer temporary relief, they are income. Remove them and households do not adjust, they collapse. What looks like fiscal discipline from a spreadsheet looks like betrayal on the street. Raise prices and you admit scarcity. Scarcity is not just an economic condition. It is a political confession. It means the system cannot provide. It means control was illusion. The moment prices are allowed to speak, they tell a story leaders have spent years denying. End controls and you expose fiction. Shelves empty before they refill. Prices jump before supply responds. What economists call transition, citizens experience as shock. Even if the end result is healthier, the beginning feels like failure. And failure, in politicized systems, is intolerable. Stop printing, and the state itself runs out of cash. Salaries halt, contracts break, transfers freeze. The machinery that keeps loyalty circulating grinds to a stop. In a system where the state is employer, buyer, and insurer of last resort, tightening money is not neutral. It is existential. Each lever corrects one distortion while detonating another. This is the political trap. Reform requires short-term pain for long-term stability. But regimes built on distribution cannot endure short-term pain. Their legitimacy is not rooted in institutions, rules, or trust. It is transactional. Goods in exchange for compliance. Stability in exchange for silence. Once legitimacy becomes transactional, austerity becomes impossible. Any reduction in benefits feels like theft. Any admission of limits feels like weakness. Any appeal to patience sounds like abandonment. The political cost of reform arrives immediately, while the economic benefits arrive later, often under someone else's leadership. Rational actors avoid that trade. This is why paralysis persists, even when collapse is visible. Leaders are not choosing failure over success, they are choosing survival over correction. In the short run, printing money, extending controls, and denying reality preserve power better than reform ever could. The system rewards delay. Each postponement raises the cost of eventual adjustment, which makes adjustment even less attractive. Inflation accelerates, but subsidies expand. Shortages spread, but controls tighten. Capital flees, but rhetoric hardens. Every response treats symptoms while deepening the disease. From the inside, this feels like management. Fires are put out daily. Crises are contained weekly. The system appears active, responsive, engaged, but nothing structural changes, because structure is the source of political survival. Paralysis, then, is not incompetence. It is equilibrium, a bad equilibrium, but a stable one. The system has learned that any serious correction threatens the coalition that keeps it alive, so it chooses motion over direction, distribution over repair, noise over truth. In this trap, even well-designed reforms fail before they begin, not because they are wrong, but because they arrive too late and demand too much honesty at once. By the time reform is unavoidable, it is also unmanageable. And that is the most dangerous stage of all. On paper, the system still looks alive. Employment exists. People have jobs, titles, schedules. GDP moves, reported with confidence, adjusted, rebased, explained. Wages are paid regularly, announced publicly, increased ceremonially. Elections are held, institutions meet, laws are passed. The machinery of a modern state continues to operate. For anyone scanning headlines or data sets, the story feels incomplete but not catastrophic. That is the danger. These numbers are like measuring a patient's weight while ignoring internal bleeding. The body appears stable. Vital signs exist. Movement continues, but the systems that sustain life are quietly failing underneath. Employment no longer signals productivity. It signals absorption. Jobs exist not because value is being created, but because labor must be contained. Work becomes a holding pattern, a way to distribute income without demanding output. Productivity stagnates, but the headcount grows. GDP moves, but direction becomes meaningless. Growth, driven by printing or accounting changes, does not translate into capacity. It inflates figures without building foundations. Output rises in reports, while shelves thin in reality. Wages are paid, but wages are no longer compensation for value. They are instruments of stability. Their purpose is not to reward contribution, but to prevent rupture. When wages lose their link to productivity, they lose their power to guide behavior. Underneath the surface, the real economy is shrinking. Capital leaves quietly, not in dramatic exits, but in decisions not made. Factories are not upgraded, equipment is not replaced, maintenance is postponed. Investment horizons shorten, then disappear. What remains is extraction, not creation. Skills decay next. When complex industries collapse, knowledge follows. Engineers become traders. Professionals become intermediaries. Education shifts from mastery to escape. The system continues to educate people it cannot use, training them for economies elsewhere. Formal markets retreat as informal ones expand. Contracts give way to relationships, rules give way to negotiation. Efficiency is replaced by improvisation. This is not resilience, it is substitution. The economy survives, but only in the way a body survives on adrenaline. Short bursts of energy mask long-term damage. Crisis management replaces strategy. Each day is handled successfully, while the future is quietly abandoned. This is why the illusion holds. Activity is visible, movement is constant, transactions occur, the props are convincing. But backstage, the wiring is frayed, the lights flicker, the crew improvises, the script is forgotten. The brutal analogy fits because it explains the disconnect perfectly. Venezuela's economy became a stage play where the props move, but nothing backstage works. Actors hit their marks, scenes change. The audience sees motion and assumes function. But the mechanisms that make the performance repeatable, scalable, and sustainable are broken. And a system that relies on illusion for stability becomes addicted to it. Real repair would interrupt the show, so the play continues, night after night, even as the structure holding the stage together weakens. Eventually, the audience does not need data to understand what is wrong. They feel it. Because no performance can compensate forever for a system that has forgotten how to work. When systems like this finally crack, they do not explode. They grind. There is no single day of collapse. No definitive headline that announces the end. Instead, the system enters a long phase of friction. Every transaction takes more effort. Every decision carries more uncertainty. Progress slows not because nothing moves, but because everything resists. Currency is the first to fracture. As trust erodes, people search for substitutes. Foreign currencies circulate quietly at first, then openly. Prices are quoted in one unit, paid in another. The national currency remains official, but no longer central. It becomes a tool for transfers, not for storage. Money stops being a memory of value and becomes a temporary instrument to escape as quickly as possible. When currency loses credibility, barter returns, not as nostalgia, but as efficiency. Goods are exchanged directly, services replace invoices, relationships matter more than receipts. The economy does not disappear, it reverts. Migration becomes the pressure valve. Those who can leave, do. Not always permanently, but strategically. Skills, savings, and ambition exit to stabilize families back home through remittances. This reduces internal pressure while exporting future capacity. The system survives by shedding its most mobile parts. Institutions follow the same path. They hollow out, buildings remain, titles exist, procedures are performed. But experienced staff leave or disengage. Decision-making slows. Enforcement weakens. Rules are applied selectively. The symbols of a functioning state persist while the substance drains away. This is the real breaking point. Not chaos, but distortion. The danger is not sudden collapse. It is permanence. A country can remain stuck for decades in this condition, neither dead nor alive. Too functional to trigger intervention, too broken to generate growth. Life continues, but always at the edge. Human capital drains silently in this phase. Each departure feels rational. Each adaptation feels temporary. Together, they form a one-way flow. The system adjusts to lower expectations and calls it stability. What makes this state so difficult to escape is that it still works, just poorly. People survive, the government governs, markets operate informally. Nothing forces a reset. Without a clear breaking moment, there is no clear rebuilding moment either. Control becomes the glue holding it all together. Controls keep prices predictable enough. Controls keep loyalty manageable. Controls keep the narrative intact. But every layer of control replaces capacity with compliance, production with permission, initiative with caution. This is the unavoidable tension at the heart of the system. Control preserves power in the short term, but it destroys capacity in the long term. The more tightly the system is held together, the less it can actually do. The harder it grips, the weaker it becomes. By the time this is obvious, the system is already dependent on that weakness. Letting go risks exposure, tightening risks decay. Either way, the cost is cumulative. There is no dramatic ending here, only erosion. And erosion, once normalized, becomes very hard to reverse. Venezuela is not unique. It is early. To see this clearly, you have to step back and use history as a time machine. The patterns are already written. They appear wherever resource wealth replaces productive feedback and where governments learn that loyalty is more reliable than markets. Across the 20th century, multiple controlled economies followed similar arcs. In parts of Eastern Europe, centralized planning muted price signals in the name of stability and equality. Output targets replaced demand. Shortages were explained away. Official statistics improved even as lived reality deteriorated. The systems did not collapse immediately. They persisted for decades, grinding forward on distortion and denial. Petrostates followed a parallel path. Sudden revenue from natural resources created the illusion of development. Money arrived faster than institutions could form. Governments expanded before accountability could mature. Distribution became easier than reform. Oil funded the present while quietly mortgaging the future. In each case, the mechanism was the same. When revenue does not depend on citizens producing value, governments stop optimizing for productivity. They optimize for control. Markets become inconvenient. Feedback becomes dangerous. Loyalty becomes the currency that matters most. At first, the results look impressive. Poverty falls quickly. Consumption rises. Infrastructure expands. The system feels successful because money is moving. But movement is not development. Development requires learning, and learning requires failure. These systems do not tolerate failure well. When mistakes cannot be admitted, they cannot be corrected. When losses are blamed instead of analyzed, they repeat. Over time, the system loses its ability to adapt. It becomes rigid, defensive, and slow. Every shock requires more intervention. Every intervention weakens the base further. Venezuela fits this pattern precisely, but with a modern twist. Globalization allowed capital, people, and information to exit faster than in past examples. This accelerated the hollowing out phase. What once took generations now unfolds within a single lifetime. That is why Venezuela feels extreme. Not because it is unprecedented, but because it is compressed. The country is not a warning from the past. It is a preview of what happens when incentives align against feedback in real time. This matters beyond borders. The same pressures exist wherever governments rely heavily on resource rents, debt monetization, or controlled distribution to maintain legitimacy. The same temptation appears whenever short-term calm is politically safer than long-term repair. The same trap closes whenever power learns it can survive without listening. The unsettling part is how ordinary this process is. No conspiracy is required, no singular villain, just incentives behaving predictably. That is the real warning. This is not a Venezuelan story. It is a systems story that waits patiently for the same incentives to appear elsewhere. And when they do, the timeline rarely announces itself. It begins with stability, then success, then control, then silence. By the time anyone thinks to look backward, the system has already decided what it can no longer hear. From here, there are only two realistic paths. The first is painful correction. It begins by restoring prices to their function as messengers, not enemies. Scarcity is allowed to speak. Losses are acknowledged instead of disguised. The state shrinks not because ideology demands it, but because capacity requires it. Trust is rebuilt slowly, unevenly, through consistency rather than promises. This path is not dramatic, it is administrative. It involves years of visible hardship with few immediate rewards. Inflation is confronted instead of denied. Subsidies are replaced with targeted support that feels insufficient at first. Institutions relearn how to say no. Markets relearn how to fail. The economy relearns how to listen. Politically, this path is dangerous. It offers little spectacle and no instant victories. It demands patience from people who have already spent years improvising survival. But it restores something the system has lost entirely: feedback. And with feedback, the possibility of learning returns. The second path is corrosive continuity. This path avoids confrontation and manages decline. Controls remain, slightly adjusted. Printing continues, carefully paced. New narratives explain old problems. The economy adapts downward and calls it resilience. Migration becomes policy by omission. People are exported instead of goods. Remittances replace investment. Illusions grow thinner, but familiar. On this path, the system does not collapse. It stabilizes at a lower level of complexity. Informality becomes permanent. Institutions become symbolic. Education trains people for exit rather than contribution. Life continues, but always below its potential, always improvisational. This path feels safer because it avoids rupture. It preserves power structures. It keeps the stage standing, even if the backstage never recovers. But it is corrosive. Each year makes reversal harder. Each adaptation lowers expectations. Each generation normalizes dysfunction. Neither path is comfortable. One demands admitting how much has already been lost. The other demands accepting that more will be lost quietly. Only one is reversible. Correction is painful because it concentrates suffering early. Continuity is corrosive because it spreads suffering endlessly. One path risks unrest now to regain capacity later. The other preserves calm now by surrendering the future. There is no third option. No clever workaround. No external rescue that bypasses incentives. Systems do not heal through rhetoric. They heal through alignment. The moral is quiet but absolute. An economy that cannot hear reality will eventually be ruled by it. Reality can be delayed, reframed, or silenced for a time, but it cannot be negotiated with indefinitely. When feedback is suppressed long enough, it returns as force rather than information. This is not the end of the story. It is the end of one illusion. Next, we examine how oil wealth reshaped power itself, and why resource riches so often end not in freedom, but in control.